All right, welcome to the conversation. National politics is a mess. Supreme Court might be a mess. Let's try to sort it out. David Sirota is the founder and editor of the Daily Poster, does some of the best journalism in America. David, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. I just want to clarify here. The Democrats tried to end the filibuster to pass voting rights. It failed. Sinema and Manchin voted no. So we're done, right? And I'm asking this as a very literal question. The next 3 years, if you don't get rid of the filibuster, you can't pass any major legislation. So are you hearing anything about Democrats trying to pass anything else for the next 3 years in Washington? Or have they kind of accepted their defeat and just moved to surrender?
Well, I mean, the question about that is ultimately a question about, if you're not going to get rid of the filibuster, it's a question of what are you going to do with the reconciliation process, or is the Build Back Better bill, is that dead too? And it certainly seems, to use Princess Bride language, it certainly seems mostly dead. Now, maybe it's not completely dead, but they still have technically a vehicle through which to pass legislation with needing only 50 senators plus the vice president. Whether they actually use that for something real, something that actually delivers real help to lots and lots of people, I mean, that remains an open question. And I think the weaker Joe Biden has gotten in his political standing, the easier it is perceived to be by people like Manchin, Sinema, and the probably 5 or 7 other Democratic senators that Manchin and Sinema represent. It's easier for them to just walk away from any kind of deal whatsoever. So, look, it's not a good time. It's a bad moment, and I wish there were other things to say about it other than that. The Democratic Party has basically, if not given up, it certainly seems to have stalled out right now, and I don't know where it goes from here.
So I guess a more specific version of that question is, have you heard about them talking about any other legislation? Or is it like maybe we'll bring back like a depleted 10%, 20% of Build Back Better and try to, get that over the finish line so we can pretend we did something that Manchin and Sinema have allowed? I get that that's possible. I guess voting rights is no longer possible, so we're just gonna let the Republicans steamroll us in all the states with anti-voting legislation they've passed in all those different places. But is there, like, usually there's like a rumor mill of another piece of legislation that's gonna come up? Is that completely dead? Are they like, no, guys, you don't get it. We have a secret fourth dimensional plan, and we're actually gonna get this passed, 6 months from now?
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, I think there's been some talk that they might, around the edges of democracy reform, they might pass the electoral voting reform, which is basically there's a couple of Republicans who say they're open to the idea of making very clear that the vice president can't just steal an election through a kind of arcane counting of the electoral votes process. That's a pretty marginal.
No, that's actually not a law. No, because that law already exists. They're just saying, by the way, you should follow this law.
We're just gonna reiterate a law. Right. So it's a pretty marginal, it's not really a change, it's kind of a restatement of what is true. But in terms of, sweeping voting rights legislation, we've just tested that. There doesn't seem to be a path for that outside of getting rid of the filibuster, and we just saw that happen. So I haven't heard any rumor like that. I do think that they will try to cobble together, as you said, 10, 20, 30% of what Build Back Better was, pass that, and then claim some giant victory. Of course, the political danger of that is that in not delivering for people on major promises and then running out and saying you delivered a huge win, ultimately people are going to realize what happened and not be all that happy. So it's kind of a catch-22 where if you try to trick people, ultimately people will realize that the help that they were promised wasn't delivered. So I go back to what I've been saying for a long time now. I feel like a broken record. That if you don't deliver for people, when you win an election and are given power on promises to deliver for people, you should not turn around in the next election and be surprised that lots of people are either angry or lots of people are just not motivated to come out and vote for you.
Yeah, no, I know they gave up because the arm twisting has begun. It's public, it's not anything nefarious. Well, it's totally nefarious, but it has 0% chance of working on progressives. But where Democrats and other people in media start yelling at people like us and saying you're not doing sufficient marketing for the Democratic Party, right? If you
well, I mean, the funny part about that is the really funny part about that is that the same people who yell at the left at this time of the election cycle, and it always starts right now, about 10, 11 months before the election, yelling at the left from the center of the Democratic Party, is the center of the Democratic Party, the corporate center of the Democratic Party, has gotten everything it wanted. This is its dream scenario. It got a lobbyist-written infrastructure bill passed. It has up to now stopped most of the progressive agenda items and promises that the rest of the party has made. So the Build Back Better bill is stalled out, and they've gotten on policy exactly what they want. Now, of course, Joe Biden's approval ratings are in the tank. The Democrats look like they're about to get massacred in the next election. So the logical conclusion is that giving the corporate center of the Democratic Party what it wants may be a big policy victory for corporate lobbyists, for the establishment, but it's not necessarily a big political victory for the Democratic Party as a whole. In fact, arguably, at least in a snapshot of right now, giving the corporate center of the Democratic Party what it wants is a political and electoral disaster for the larger Democratic Party.
No, this is why I now have switched from being frustrated with mainstream media to pretty much loathing them, because they're all liars. And I don't say that lightly. We're not right wingers. Like, we get how the trick works. You put in facts and then you put the framing around it to make it seem like it's the opposite of what you just said. And so in this case, I mean, look at what David's point is. Unassailable. There's no question that this is exactly what corporate Democrats wanted. And Washington Post writes an article saying Democratic Party's gone too far left. Now, that's in anticipation of them losing the election, which they know they're going to lose. And so they could turn around and blame us. Well, we're not happy. We don't want this. This sucks, right? And then they say, no, you should cheerlead for it. Plus, when we lose, it's your fault because we went too much towards you. Well, you went too much towards us. Why do we hate it? You didn't go anywhere near us. Anyways, we got to move on to the second topic, which is the Supreme Court. Look, David, before you even get to your point, which is a great one, are we sure they're going to get someone on the Supreme Court? I mean, there's no end to how deeply Democrats can bungle something. So when I heard Breyer's retiring, I was like, be careful what you wish for.
Right, I'm not sure they're going to get a Supreme Court justice onto the court. I don't know why anybody would feel sure of that. We've seen Manchin and Sinema be willing to stop the president's economic agenda. What's to say they or a couple other senators will vote with the Republicans to stop a nominee? I mean, I don't think it's a sure thing at all. I do think that Joe Biden, if you made me guess, I do think that he will probably try to put up some kind of nominee that appeases as many of the real power brokers in Congress, that is, appeases or mollifies big money. I hope I'm wrong about that. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that, the Chamber of Commerce really calls the shots when it comes to court politics. And I think my guess is, I'm just speculating here, that Biden will try to pick a judicial nominee who isn't all that offensive to corporate power and the Chamber of Commerce.
No, there's no question about it. Write it down in stone, because Biden is reeling. He's not going to want to put up a nominee and have it be rejected. What is the only way that he can guarantee that the nominee will not be rejected is if he picks a nominee that is handpicked by the Chamber of Commerce, so that Manchin and Sinema and the Republicans will give that person permission to be on the court. So that means, congratulations, you just got a democratically appointed justice who will very likely be very, very pro-business. So David, there is some history of that, isn't there?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, the Supreme Court conversation in America is almost always only about so-called social issues, hot button social issues, which are important issues: civil rights, choice, voting rights, and the like. These are all very important issues. The problem is that they're not the only issues that the court deals with. That on a day-to-day basis, the court is mostly dealing with business issues, issues related to how our economy functions. And on those issues, the Supreme Court has moved very, very hard to the right since John Roberts was appointed to the court. John Roberts was a Chamber of Commerce lawyer. He represented them in private practice. It was a huge victory for the Chamber of Commerce to get John Roberts on the court in 2005. And since then, on business cases, John Roberts has engineered a court that has moved farther and farther to the right. Whereas two courts before John Roberts, the Berger Court, was basically split between the Chamber of Commerce in terms of rulings for the Chamber of Commerce or against the Chamber of Commerce, whereas it was split 2 generations ago. Now the Roberts Court is delivering 70% of case victories to the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce represents big business. It files amicus briefs at the court, making clear what kinds of decisions it wants. So 70% of the time, the court is now ruling with the Chamber of Commerce. These are the issues about economic regulation, about union rights, about worker rights, about whether federal agencies can punish corporate wrongdoers or not. A whole myriad of cases that deal with the economy. And so the what's not talked about really almost ever in corporate media is the fact that this is what the Supreme Court is mostly doing. And yet this is almost never discussed in Supreme Court nominations. I mean, you may remember during the Neil Gorsuch nomination, a corporate issue came up for like 1 minute. It was about Neil Gorsuch's ruling on a case involving a trucker who was freezing to death on the side of the road, and a company basically tried to fire him. It came up for like 1 minute, and it was a big story, and then it kind of went away, never to be really talked about again. And what was incredible was it was so rare that economic issues were even discussed in the context of a Supreme Court nomination, even though, again, the Supreme Court is mostly dealing with those kinds of cases.
Yeah, 2 points about that that's going to lead to our last question. So number one, the corporate takeover of the Supreme Court started with a guy named Lewis Powell. He wrote the famous or the infamous Powell memo, and Nixon liked the idea so much, he put Powell on the Supreme Court. And Powell was a lawyer for the Chamber of Commerce, just like John Roberts. And so they've been doing this for a long time. But now, to your point, David, it's not just the right-wing justices that are in favor of business interests. It's also the theoretically left-wing justice. And of course, the mainstream media never talks about any of this because it would be against their corporate interests. And so I've never seen them discuss business cases in Supreme Court nominations, except for that one exception you just mentioned, right? Well, it's the majority of the cases they handle, and it involves basically trillions of dollars. And that's not relevant. That's not relevant. Of course it's relevant, but they never talk about it. But David, part of the reason they don't, other than the fact that they're corporate media, is the corporate Democrats never bring it up in the confirmation hearings. So there's no drama around it. There's no soap opera around it, because the Democrats want to look the other way too. They have the same exact donors, which leads to the final question of the voting record of Breyer and the other so-called liberal justices when it comes to the Chamber of Commerce. How right-wing is that, or left-wing?
It's a great question, and it's the right point to make. Stephen Breyer, as an example, known as a liberal justice, Stephen Breyer voted in his career 53% of the time with the Chamber of Commerce. That's the left edge of the court. Actually, to be fair, Sotomayor is the left edge of the court. She only supports the Chamber of Commerce position 43% of the time. But the point is that even on the very left edge of the court, you have justices voting routinely on the side of capital, against labor, against retirees, against working people in general. That's how far right the court has moved. And the point here is that if Biden replaces Breyer with another Stephen Breyer-esque judge, it will further lock in that rightward shift for yet another generation at precisely a moment where the excesses of corporate power are so wildly obvious, right? To double down on a court that has moved so far to the economic right at a time of such a dystopian economy would really be a huge, huge missed opportunity. But again, that hasn't even been part of the conversation at all since Breyer announced his retirement. It's just not part of the conversation, which, as you imply, is exactly the point. That corporate media is not here to raise questions or scrutinize the corporate record of corporate jurists. The corporate media is here to distract people's attention from that, to make people think that John Roberts, as an example, is a quote unquote moderate because once in a while he doesn't side with the very, very hard right on the court on a social issue, even though he is engineering a court for the long haul that has moved the law to the very far right on the core major economic issues that affect people every day.
So you and I care a lot about facts. So let me correct you on one thing, and I get it from your own story at the Daily Poster, which is great. Sotomayor, unfortunately, and I like her a lot. I mentioned it earlier on the Young Turks. I actually voted 48% of the time with.
Sorry, you're right. I was too generous. Sorry about that.
So the outer left edge of the Supreme Court agrees with the Chamber of Commerce basically every other time, which is not how it's supposed to be. So, but we've forgotten all of that. And of course, another thing that won't be brought up likely is Citizens United. It should be a litmus test for the left. It's absurd to say that corporations are human beings that have speech rights and they could bribe all of our politicians. But my guess is all we'll ever talk about is identity politics and social issues. None of those things will ever make any dent. And by the way, not just corporate Democrats. I'd be surprised if any Democrats brought up those issues and made a big stink about it. Honestly, they barely make a big stink about anything. So.
And let me add one quick thing. There's one other thing that isn't brought up very much. It's economic issues, but it's also environmental issues. I should have mentioned it before. The climate change issue and the court's oversight of how the law applies to polluters. This is obviously an enormously important issue. Not part of the conversation so far at all. Barely part of the conversation, even in the Amy Coney Barrett hearing, although it did come up momentarily. But the point is that that's the biggest issue, arguably, of the entire millennia, and it's barely part of the conversation.
All right, check out everything that David's doing. DailyPoster.com. Meltdown's podcast is terrific that you should listen to. And of course, he was also a producer on Don't Look Up. It was his idea in the first place, the Meteor idea. So check that out on Netflix. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you. Thanks, Cenk.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.